Hey gang, welcome back to another video. Now, so much of Halloween decorating involves the use of foam. Whether it's blue or pink insulation foam, expanding foam, or even EVA craft foam. So with that in mind, I've pulled together 5 of my favorite foam builds to hopefully inspire your next Halloween project. So let's get into it. So one of the things I love about Halloween is that there's just so many different ways you can decorate for it. So in this video, I'm going to step outside of my cemetery aesthetic and build a treasure chest that would be a perfect fit for a pirate-themed haunt or party. So let's get to it. This build will start with a few pieces of 1-inch insulation foam. 2 pieces for the front and back, 2 sides, 2 half rounds for the lid, and 6 planks for the top. A bottom seemed unnecessary, but you could add one in if that fits your needs. With that out of the way, let's get down to building. Now I could have done planks for the entire build, but to save a bit of time, I'm going to use my planks as a guide for some V-shaped score lines that I'll cut into the foam with a razor blade. This will give the appearance of individual boards without having to cut them out. And when all my lines are cut, I can shift my focus to making them look more like old wood. Longtime viewers of the channel will know that one of my favorite tricks for making foam look like old wood is to scrape it with a wire brush. And since the treasure chest has a lot of wood planks, I think it's time for a scraping montage. With all of our pieces thoroughly wood-grained, let's talk about the top of our treasure chest. Because this piece is round and our planks are flat, we'll need to add some facets to these pieces. So I've marked out the width of each plank and will draw myself a guideline to sand down to so that the planks will have a solid surface to be glued to. And speaking of glue, I'll be using my SureBonder Cosplay Stick hot glue to hold everything together. Much to my surprise, it works great on this XPS insulation foam and helps to make quick time of this build. So with my glue gun in hand, I got to attaching my planks. For this build I use 3-inch planks, but I'm recommending that you use 4-inch planks to close up the gaps a bit better. Or if you want a really old and rickety looking chest and want to stretch your materials a bit further, go with 3-inch like I did. Either way, they'll both look the part. Now that all the lid planks are glued in, I can switch over to assembling the bottom of the chest. And just as I glued in my sides, I realized I forgot to taper them. So after a quick measurement and some cut lines drawn, I could trim off the excess and resume assembly. And just for a bit of added stability, I ran some extra glue along the inside faces. It's probably unnecessary, but better safe than sorry. With the main structures assembled, it's time to get into the decorative elements, starting with this 2-inch wide EVA foam that I'll be using to recreate the look of iron bands. If you wanted to get a bit more decorative, you could heat press some designs into the foam, cut it into different shapes, or even use a rotary tool to add hammer marks. This is a great opportunity to add some personality to the chest, although for this build, I'm keeping it nice and simple. Off camera, I gave everything a coat of black acrylic paint, and now I can start adding in some color to the bands. I'm using a dark metallic acrylic paint to help make the foam banding look a bit less like foam. I had wanted to add rivets, but I ran out of googly eyes. But then after looking through my supplies, I found these self-adhesive rubber feet and thought they'd get the job done. So now I just need to apply them and give them a quick coat of paint. Ideally, they would have been applied before the black base layer, but sometimes you just have to roll with the punches and make the best of it. Once the paint had dried, I could start working on the planks. And for that, I'll be using a bit of raw sienna acrylic paint and we'll be dry brushing it on. This method will add just enough color to the outermost edge while keeping the black paint in the recesses. I started pretty light with my dry brushing, and as I got a better feel for how it looked, I increased the amount of paint on my brush. This is a pretty forgiving technique, but like most things, it's usually best to get a feel for it before going too far. It's also a good idea to keep a damp rag handy just in case you get some of your paint onto the metallic bands. I'll apply paint to the entire chest and then set it aside to dry. Off camera, I added in these hinge pieces made from the same 3mm foam that the rest of the banding is made from. I also added some banding along the lower edge of the lid since it looked unfinished when I set the lid on top of the base. The last part of this build is a bit of aging with a light gray wash. This step is optional, but I think it makes the bands look a bit more interesting and adds some variety to the coloring of the planks. My mixture is about 10 parts water to 1 part paint. I'm not looking for a lot of color in this step. I just want to desaturate the coloring of the treasure chest a bit so that it doesn't look quite so punchy. You can apply as much or as little as you like, and touch up any areas with a damp rag to prevent unwanted runs or pooling of paint. And after a bit of dry time, I think it's safe to call this treasure chest done. Now, if you've ever needed to make a fake fireplace, or maybe just some burning embers for a pirate scene like in Pirates of the Caribbean, then I've got the perfect project for you. I was recently reminded of this great project by my friend Nick Walters, and now I'm here to share it with you. So let's get to it. For this build, we'll need 3 things: a red or orange pool noodle, some kind of tool for picking away at the foam, as well as black and gray acrylic paints. Now that we've got everything, let's start by tearing this pool noodle into the size of a small log. The rougher the edge, the better. Because of the factory edge on the other side, we'll need to use this sculpting tool, or any other pointy object, and pick away at the edge until it looks something like the end of a broken branch. With that out of the way, we can start giving our pool noodle a rough, bark-like texture by dragging the sculpting tool horizontally across the surface. We're aiming to create recesses of varying heights and widths in the foam, which will help to break up the cylindrical shape of the pool noodle and trick the eye into thinking it's something different. You'll want to repeat this process until your pool noodle looks a bit more like this. Now we can move on to paint. For this prop, since we're aiming for a burned but still smoldering log, I decided to go with black acrylic paint, and I'm just going to apply it to the high spots, making sure to let some of the bare pool noodle still shine through. It's okay to get some into the recesses, as long as some of that orange color is still visible. Once the black paint had dried, I grabbed a light gray color and will apply it with a dry brush to highlight some of the edges of the piece. This step helps to create another visual breakup and works well if there's a chance it'll be seen in the daytime. Now we can get to my favorite part of this technique, adding lights. I had this strand of white LED lights that I'll insert into the pool noodle, and because there's still some of the orange showing through, it will glow like a smoldering log. but we've got to wait for the sun to go down a bit. That's better. As you can see, it definitely has a similar look to a smoldering log. And if you wanted to take this effect a step further, you could add in a flicker module with your LED lights to give it some more character. You could also choose to apply more of your black paint in areas to give it even more of a subdued appearance. The weather's finally starting to warm up here in Los Angeles, which can only mean one thing. It's time to start working on Halloween projects. So join me for this Halloween how-to as I turn insulation foam into realistic tombstones, perfect for your yard display or haunted house. The first step for any tombstone is figuring out the epitaph. This one was provided to me along with an inspiration photo, so I've just got to figure out how I want the text laid out. I like using Adobe Illustrator for this, but you could use any word processor app. Once I've got my layout finished, I'll export it to my vinyl cutter software to create a stencil. This is the method that I like to use because it's a lot faster and I'm always looking for efficiencies. But you could also print out your epitaph on paper and make your own stencil. Or skip the stencil altogether and use your printout to trace your epitaph onto the foam. Once my stencil vinyl is applied, I can get to painting my stencil. I'll be using spray paint, which is typically a bad idea since the solvents will melt the foam. But if you paint from a distance and in very light passes, the solvents will evaporate before the paint hits the foam and you can use it to transfer your design. With my epitaph painted, I can get to carving out my design. And for this, I'll be using a rotary tool and my carving base. This base plate is something I made for myself a few years back. I found that it's extremely helpful in keeping the rotary tool perpendicular to the foam by stabilizing it as you slide it across the surface. Plus, the adjustable collar helps to guarantee consistent carving depth. Once my epitaph is carved, I'll grab some 120 grit sandpaper to knock down any rough edges left behind by the rotary tool, and then I can move on to sketching out the top arch. The reference photo I was given had an arch along the top, so I'll be fabricating one from a scrap of 1-inch foam, and once I finalize the design, I can use a hot wire tool to cut it out. I like using this hot wire table for as many foam projects as I can because it's less of a mess than using a jigsaw or a handsaw. It also allows me to get into tight corners that would be a bit more challenging with other methods. When I've got my shape roughed out, I'll grab my palm sander with 60 grit sandpaper and we'll start to refine the piece until I've got the shape I'm after. And I'll use my rasp on any areas where I need to remove a bit more material. Now that I've got my arch squared away, I'll grab some glue and we'll get to attaching it and can set it aside to dry. Because my epitaph is so big, I'll need to add foam along the bottom to have mounting points for the base pieces. So I cut a few chunks of 2-inch foam and we'll glue it to the bottom using a few skewers to help keep things in place while it dries. Once the glue was dry, I could get to adding on the base foam pieces. I marked the center on both pieces to help with alignment, and then placed a few weights on the foam to keep everything in place while the glue set up. I repeated this step for the back and sides, and the following day I could trim off the excess foam and blend all the seams with my palm sander. This 60 grit paper really cuts through the foam and makes quick time of this step. One of my favorite tricks to making foam tombstones look more realistic is to add decorative profiles to elements of the prop. In this case, I'm using my palm router with a roundover bit to give the base a bit more visual interest. The downside is that this can be very messy, but it's totally worth it. When I've routed my design all the way around the base, I'll switch over to a piece of sandpaper to clean up any uneven edges. The next thing I want to do is add some cracks. So I'll grab my razor blade and we'll draw out a few lines at 45 degrees to the surface of the foam. And then I'll flip the blade to the opposite 45-degree angle and we'll carve out a V shape. Then I can use the tip of the blade to pick out the foam and rough up any areas that may look a bit too intentional. I also like to drag the blade along the edges to give it a chipped out look. You can do as much or as little of this as you like, although I like to err on the side of less is more. It's also worth considering the date of the epitaph and how a tombstone of that age might look. Because this one is supposed to be from 1691, I figured I could be a bit more aggressive with the aging. Next up, I'm going to add some texture to the tombstone with a bit of water and a propane torch. For this effect, you want to create as many small water droplets as possible on the face of the tombstone. These droplets will protect the foam underneath them from the heat. The dry areas will slightly melt as you pass over them with the torch, which creates the texture. This is definitely something you'll want to get a feel for before doing it on your nearly finished props. But it's a total game changer in how the foam looks, especially once you get to painting and weathering. Before I can get to that, I like to fill all of the seams with paintable caulk. This helps to make everything look like a solid piece and prevents any unwanted moisture from collecting between the pieces of foam. Now that everything has had a chance to dry, I can get to painting. I had this can of masonry sealer, but it's white, and that's not going to work for this project. But thankfully, it's latex-based, so I can use acrylic paints to tint it. I'll add a bit of brown and black acrylic paint to the can, and we'll mix the paint until the color is consistent, and then I can apply it to the foam. Whenever I paint tombstones with masonry sealer, I like to go heavy around the areas where there's no carvings and light in the areas where there are. That way I'm not filling in the epitaph with paint, which will then make them harder to read. I also like to use a pouncing motion to keep from leaving brush strokes. It's probably not something that people would notice from 10 feet away, but I'm that guy who likes to overthink the small details, so take it with a grain of salt. I'll give the entire tombstone 2 coats of paint and then I'll set it aside to dry. Before I get into the weathering stage of the build, I need to fill in the epitaph, and for that I'll be using a bit of science in the form of capillary action. Essentially, I'll be wetting down the epitaph and then dipping my paintbrush into the letters, which will cause the paint to flow into all of the recesses. Any paint that makes its way outside of the letters can be blotted away with a rag. This method doesn't completely black out the letters, but it does create a more natural aged look, which helps to sell the overall effect of an old tombstone. Once I've filled in all of my design, I'll fill in the crack and add a few dark spots around the face of the tombstone with the black paint I used for the lettering. This will help to give the weathering a bit more dimension. And speaking of weathering, now that my epitaph is dry, I can mix up my acrylic paint wash and get to spraying. If it's hot outside, you'll want to start by wetting down your tombstone with water to help the paint mixture spread and flow more evenly. This will also help to keep it from drying out too quickly. This wash is roughly 1 part brown acrylic, 1 part green acrylic, and 10 to 15 parts water, and it will get applied to the entire tombstone. Any areas where the wash is too heavy or isn't running down the face of the tombstone will get a quick spray of water to help it along. While I waited for the first pass to dry, I added a bit more black paint to my wash to darken it up, and once the tombstone was dry, I applied another layer of my paint wash to build up to my final look. Expanding foam, cardboard, and a bucket, plus a few hand tools and paint, are all you need to make a fake tree stump for your haunted house or Halloween display. It's great for adding visual interest, can be used to hide a video projector, and in this video, I'll show you how. To get started, I'm going to take some pieces of cardboard that are about the same height as my bucket, and I'm going to draw on a jagged, sloped shape and cut them out with a utility knife. This will be used to create the look of roots for our tree stump. Once I have 4 to 6 of them cut out, I'll take my hot glue gun and begin gluing them to the sides of an inverted 5-gallon bucket. Be sure to remove the bucket handle first, and apply a liberal amount of glue to help keep them in place. Try to place them randomly to allow for a more organic-looking tree stump. Now that they're attached, I'm going to take a piece of foam board to create a base. This could also be done with a thin piece of plywood. Place your stump on the board and trace out the shape, adding 2 inches around the base and cut it out. With the base cut out, it's time to glue it all together and start applying foam. Before we start, let's hear a quick word about foam safety.
Expanding foam. It's the future, but not in the way you think. While this magic in a can may be great for Halloween projects, if used incorrectly, it'll stick to you, your clothes, and anything nearby from now until next year. So be sure to use as directed and tell your friends about great stuff.
With gloved hands, it's time to add our expanding foam. Starting with the top, slowly create a circular pattern with foam until you've covered the top of the stump, keeping in mind that the foam will expand. So don't worry about missing any small gaps. Once you've covered the top, start applying foam in long vertical passes to the sides of your bucket. This may be difficult to get started, but the foam will eventually stick to itself as you apply it. Continue to cover the entire bucket in foam and allow it to fully expand based on the directions. Now that the foam is fully expanded, it's ready to be shaped. I'm using a small handheld rasp and a jab saw to shape the stump, smoothing out the lumpy contours made by the foam and carving away the large sections where needed until it resembles a tree stump. You could also use a serrated knife or a utility knife for this step. The amount of shaping is completely up to you. You can remove as much or as little as you want, just be sure that you don't carve all the way down to your bucket. It's a messy undertaking, so I highly recommend having a shop vac handy to keep the bits of foam from getting everywhere. When you're happy with the shape, it's time to add on a hard coat. I'm using Monster Mud 2.0 from one of our other videos, but standard Monster Mud would work as well. Give the entire stump a heavy coat, making sure to brush it into all of the voids and cracks and allow it to fully dry. While you apply the Monster Mud, you can create texture by pouncing your brush into the hard coat. If you accidentally remove too much foam during the shaping part of the build, you can fill those gaps in by mixing some of the foam shavings with Monster Mud and packing it into the voids. Now that our Monster Mud hardcoat is dry, let's start painting. I'm starting off with 2 shades of brown spray paint for our base coat. The first is a lighter brown, which will cover the entire stump. Then I'll follow it up with a darker brown to create shadows in all of the inset areas and around the bottom. Next up, we'll be dry brushing a few different colors of acrylic craft paint. The first color is raw sienna. I'll be using this to highlight the high spots, paying special attention to the raised root sections. Once I'm happy with the first pass of paint, I'm going to switch to a medium brown and repeat the same process. This color buildup will help give the stump a variety of colors in the highlights and help make it look less flat. To add a pop of color, I'm going to apply some moss paint into the recessed areas and along some of the roots. This will help create more visual interest and will make it look more contoured. One quick spray of our darkest brown spray paint to help soften and blend all the colors together, and we're done. This technique can be a bit unpredictable and messy, but if you take your time and do a bit of planning, the results can be great. Use this with a cardboard tube and our PVC to wood technique to build out an entire tree, or turn it on its side and create a log. There's a ton of ways to use expanding foam and a bit of cardboard to make something out of nothing. Now, every now and again, it's good to challenge yourself to build something outside of the usual with just the scraps you have on hand. So in this video, I'm going to do just that and build a medieval torch perfect for a costume, themed room, or haunted display. So let's get to it. The base of this build consists of some common PVC pipe and PVC pipe fittings. Starting with a 1-inch pipe cut at 9 inches long, a second piece of 1-inch pipe cut at 1 inch, a 1-inch PVC coupler, and lastly a 1-inch PVC cap. They'll fit together to make a basic handle like this. But before I assemble them, I want to remove any markings, particularly this type on the end cap, with a bit of sandpaper. That's better. The next thing I'm going to do is give our handle some texture with the help of my rotary tool and a cutoff disc. You can create a decent looking fake wood grain by cutting lines into the surface of the pipe in a back and forth motion. This is the best way I've found to get a wood grain pattern onto a curved surface, where a wood graining tool wouldn't really work, and it's perfect for this build. After a quick dust off, it's time to get some paint on our handle. I'm using raw sienna acrylic paint, thinned with a tiny bit of water to help it sink into all the fine lines I created with the rotary tool. This color will act as the base wood tone and will be applied to the entire handle and then set aside to dry. Once the paint had dried, it was time to add a wash with some burnt umber acrylic paint. You'll want to thin this paint out a lot more than the base coat so that it fills in all the thin lines in the pipe, but also so that it'll stay wet longer, allowing you the time to wipe it away with a paper towel or damp rag. With the core of our handle taken care of, I can start with the upper cage portion of the build. I created these designs in Illustrator, and I'll be cutting them out of this 5mm craft foam. If you want to make your own torch, there's a free download link to my template in the video description. And just like that, I've got all my pieces cut. Isn't movie magic the best? There's 5 vertical decorative pieces, although I decided just to use 4 for easy spacing, 2 cage pieces, and the bottom cup section will be made from the wider strip and the circle. And speaking of the bottom cup section, let's get to assembling that first. I know a lot of cosplayers use contact cement with EVA foam, but I'll be using my go-to Sure Bonder cosplay stick hot glue for this build. The cosplay sticks are not like your regular hot glue sticks. It actually uses an industrial grade resin and has a higher softening point, which makes it perfect for this project. So with my glue gun at the ready, let's start putting this torch together. The round piece is designed to nest into the assembled strap piece, and then I'm able to run a bead of hot glue along the inside for added stability. This part isn't likely to be seen, so it doesn't need to be pretty. Then I can bond the thinner straps to themselves before moving on to adding the decorative vertical pieces. I'll start by applying my glue along the seams to hide them from the outside for a cleaner look, and then we'll evenly space the remaining pieces to form the upper section of the torch cage. I'll repeat these steps for a second ring, which I've spaced about an inch from the bottom edge of the first ring. And just like that, the second ring is in place, and I can move on to adding the bottom cup section, which is also spaced about an inch from the bottom edge of the second ring. Now that the foam cage is assembled, I can add in the 1-inch PVC coupler into the hole in the bottom. This really should have been done before gluing the cup in place, but learn from my mistakes and do this first. With the coupler in place, I'm going to glue these tails onto it. This will help to keep everything secure, but also helps to hide the coupler so that it doesn't look so industrial. Off camera, I heat sealed the foam by quickly passing it in front of my heat gun, which tightens up the foam structure, and I gave each of the decorative pieces a little turnout to make it a bit more interesting looking. And now I can move on to paint. And by paint, I mean rubberized coating. This coating gives most paints a good surface to bond to, and so I'll make sure that the foam and pipe get 2 heavy coats. Then I can set it aside to dry and shift my focus to the PVC end cap. This cap is really plain and needs to be modified so that it doesn't just scream, "I'm a piece of PVC pipe." So to do that, I'm going to use a pouncing motion to apply some acrylic modeling paste that should help to give this piece an old metal texture once I get to painting it. If you didn't have acrylic modeling paste, you could mix baking soda into black acrylic paint and apply it in the same way for a very similar texture. Once the cage is dry, I can take the same steps and apply texture to it as well, making sure to cover any faces that will be seen in the final prop. This modeling paste dries quickly, which makes it perfect for any of those last-minute prop builds. And speaking of dry time, all of the parts are dry and ready for paint, starting with a matte black base coat. As you can see, even with just the base coat, the texture really looks like old oxidized metal, and it'll look even better with a dusting of metallic spray paint. I'm applying this layer from about 2 feet away. My intention is just to catch the high spots, allowing the black base color to still be visible. This will make the texture stand out more and gives the piece a bit of depth. When everything is dry to the touch, we can move on to final assembly. All of the pipe pieces will fit into one another, and we can start to get a good look at our final prop. Now you know I want to add some more color to this piece, so I grabbed some red and yellow acrylic paint and mixed up a rust color and started to apply it across the cage section of the torch, followed by a wet brush to help blend out the paint. Because I want this torch to have a light inside, I grabbed some of this frosted shelf liner and cut a piece to fit inside the cage to act as a diffuser. Any thin, semi-transparent material should work, although if you're planning on using this outdoors, you'll want it to be weather resistant. And speaking of the light, I found this torch flame bulb online and saw that the LEDs inside can run off 5 volts power, which makes it perfect to run off batteries. But in order to connect it to a battery, I'm going to need to do a bit of hacking. I'm going to clip the wires that run from the LEDs to the circuit board, and since we won't need the circuit board, I'll remove that as well. Then I stripped the ends of the wires, grabbed a cell battery pack, which is just small enough to fit inside the 1-inch pipe, and connected them using some Wago connectors. And after a quick test of the light, we can get to prepping the bulb to fit inside the torch. Here's where that small segment of pipe comes into play. I'll feed the battery pack and connectors through the small piece of pipe, and using my cosplay stick hot glue again, I'll secure the pipe to the base of the light bulb. Everything then can get stuffed inside the pipe and gently press fit into the PVC coupler inside the torch to keep it in place. This also allows for it to be turned off and on without any visible switches. And since it's too bright outside to get the full effect, let's take it inside to see what the torch looks like. All in all, I think this might be one of my new favorite builds. It came together quickly and really looks the part, even in daylight. So there you have it, a fully realized prop made from the scraps that I've had laying around the shop. Now this was a low-risk creative exercise that I think paid dividends. It's also a great way to get out of a creative rut. Well, that's going to do it for this one. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, but most importantly, go make something.